Prime Minister's questions began with Rishi Sunak being asked by Keir Starmer about the location of 4,250 migrants who've gone missing. And he asks this question 4 times, I think. Listen to what he's doing, and then I'll chip in again.
Questions. I'm pleased to inform the House that since last week we've been providing British Sign Language coverage on all question statements as a matter of course. This is available directly on parliamentlive.tv and is also available to broadcasters, media outlets who may be interested in taking up the live feed. I'm delighted that House Service has been able to deliver this significant improvement to accessibility of our proceedings. We now start with questions, Prime Minister. Jason McCartney.
Question 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the Alzheimer's Society, nearly 5,000 people are currently living with dementia in my Colne Valley constituency, of whom 3,153 have had a formal diagnosis. That figure went up by 1 this week with my dad's diagnosis. My dad is my constituent. Will my right honourable friend pledge to make dementia a priority by driving up diagnosis rates, bolstering dementia research, investing in social care and improving access to the most innovative diagnostic methods and improving access to new life-changing treatments?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I send my warmest wishes to my honourable friend and his father and family, and I recognise that a dementia diagnosis can bring worry, both for the person who is diagnosed but also their wider family. And my honourable friend is absolutely right about the timely diagnosis of dementia. It's vital to make sure that those affected can access the care and support they need. NHS England is actually carrying out a pilot to make sure that we can improve dementia diagnosis in care homes. Our major condition strategy also includes a focus on dementia, but crucially, as my honourable friend said, we are now doubling the funding for dementia research so we can help everyone, including his father.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Can I send my best wishes to the honourable member and his father also, and all those suffering in this way? Mr. Speaker, I can't let today pass without saying how saddened I was by the tragic death of Bronson Battersby, aged just 2, who died in heartbreaking circumstances in Skegness. I know that this House will join me in sending our deepest sympathies to his family. Mr. Speaker, the government has been forced to admit that it has lost contact with 85% of the 5,000 people earmarked for removal to Rwanda. Has he found them yet?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the honourable gentleman is that in spite of him blocking every single attempt that we have taken, we have managed now, because of our actions, to reduce the number of people coming here by over 1/3 last year, remove over 20,000 people from this country back to their home countries, carried out 70% more illegal enforcement raids, arrested hundreds of people, closed down thousands of bank accounts, and processed over 100,000 cases, the biggest number in over 20 years, Mr. Speaker. That's because on this side of the House, we want to stop the boats, we have a plan, it's working, and with him we would just go back to square one.
My first thought is, how do you actually lose 4,250 people? Then you remember that this is the government that scrapped HS2, but the costs are still rising by billions. This is the government that spent £400 million of taxpayers' money on a Rwanda scheme, yet can't deport a single person. And this is the government that waged a week-long war on the Greek Prime Minister for reasons known only to themselves. And suddenly you're reminded that, of course, this farce of a government could lose the people it was planning to remove. But He didn't answer the question, so I'll ask him again. Where are the 4,250 people that the government has lost? Where are they?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, we've actually identified and removed over 20,000 people from this country back to where they belong. But he asks these questions about the Rwanda scheme, Mr. Speaker. Now, it is important that we get this up and running, because it's important, as the National Crime Agency say, that we have a working deterrence to resolve this issue. That's indeed how Australia solved this problem, and Albania has worked for us. But we know he asked these questions, Mr. Speaker, about the detail of these things, but we all know he doesn't actually care about solving this problem, and we know this because when the BBC asked him about the Rwanda plan, they quizzed him. They said, if the numbers crossing the channel on small boats decline, i.e., so it's working, would you still reverse it? The Labour leader said yes. It's crystal clear he doesn't have a plan, and it will be back to square one.
Mr. Speaker, spending £400 million on a plan not to get anybody to Rwanda whilst losing 4,000 people is not a plan. It's a farce. Only this government could waste hundreds of millions of pounds on a removals policy that doesn't remove anyone. Only this government could claim that it's going to get flights off the ground, only to discover they couldn't find a plane. Only this government could sign a removal deal with Rwanda, only to end up taking people from Rwanda to here. But he still hasn't answered the question. So I'll try again. What progress has he made in locating the 4,250 people his government has apparently lost? He's dodged it 3 times. Where are they?
Mr. Speaker, it's the same thing again and again. Here we are talking about what we are doing, but I'm happy to go over it, Mr. Speaker. What are we doing? We've increased the number of illegal enforcement raids by 70%, leading to thousands of arrests, using powers, Mr. Speaker, that he blocked in this House. We have closed down thousands of bank accounts of illegal workers, again, using powers that he blocked, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Mr. Do you want that early cup of tea, or are you going to be a little bit more silent, Prime Minister?
And, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have worked through a record number of cases and returned a record number of people back to where they've come. All of that is a plan that is working, and we can see that it's working because the numbers of people coming to this country are down by over a third, Mr. Speaker. But again, it is a bit rich to hear him in here pretending that he cares about how we actually stop the boats when he's been crystal clear. He's been crystal clear and said that even if the plan is working to reduce the numbers, he would still scrap it, Mr. Speaker. It's because he has no values, no conviction and no plan. It is back to square one.
No. Yes.
He hasn't got a clue where they are, has he? I can tell you one place they aren't, and that's Rwanda. Because the only people who sent to Rwanda is cabinet ministers. And for all the word, the ridiculous thing is, we know the Prime Minister himself doesn't even believe in this Rwanda gimmick. He had to be talked out of scrapping the whole thing. He didn't want to fund it. He didn't think it would work. When he sees his party tearing itself apart, hundreds of bald men scrapping over a single broken comb, doesn't he wish he'd had the courage to stick to his guns?
Well, Mr. Speaker, now, I have absolute conviction that the plan we've put in place will work. Absolute conviction, because I believe it's important that we grip this problem. Now, he spends a lot of his time in this House talking about his time as a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, and I would urge him to listen to them, because Lord Wolfson has said that our bill severely limits the... 4 eminent KCs have said that it is undoubtedly the most robust piece of immigration legislation this Parliament has seen, and Mr. Speaker, a former Supreme Court...
I want to hear what the Prime Minister's got to say. Because it matters to my constituents, those who feel it doesn't matter to those. Please leave, Prime Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, 4 eminent cases said this is undoubtedly the most robust legislation passed, and a former Supreme Court Justice has been clear that the bill would work. But I know, Mr. Speaker, he's always been more interested in what lefty lawyers have to say, Mr. Speaker. I've even got here the textbook that he authored for them. And it's called, and I quote, European Human Rights Law by Keir Starmer. So,
Prime Minister! Prime Minister, when I stand up, please sit down. Can I just say, we don't use props in this House, and I will certainly ensure that if you do need reminding, I certainly will. Keir Starmer.
It's such utterly pathetic nonsense. He's been brutally exposed by his own MPs yet again. He's got one party chair who says she hopes the Lords will rip his Rwanda deal to pieces. He's got 2 more who had to quit because they don't think it'll work. All of them appointed by him, all now in open revolt against his policy, each other, and reality. Is there any wonder they all think this gimmick is doomed to failure when the Prime Minister himself doesn't believe in it?
Mr. Speaker, it is rich to hear from the honourable gentleman about belief in something, because it will be news to him. It is actually the case that you can believe in something and stick to that position on this side of the House.
I will say to this side. Oh, hello. Somebody's jumping in from over. Can I just say it's very important. It's an important day. People want to know what's going on. So I want my constituents, just like yours, to hear what the Prime Minister's got to say. Prime Minister.
Just this week, Mr. Speaker, we had another example of the honourable gentleman doing one thing, saying another, because this week he backed the Home Secretary in banning the terrorist group Hizb ut-Tahrir, despite him personally using the European Court of Human Rights to try and stop them being banned. And don't take my word for it, Mr. Speaker, the extremist's own press release said, and I quote, the Hizb ut-Tahrir legal team led by Keir Starmer. Now, I know he doesn't like talking about them because they've been a client, but when I see a group chanting jihad on our streets, I ban them, he invoices them.
Because there's 8 questions that I think some of you may want. Well, I'll tell you what, there's some's already gone off the list who wanted them. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, if he stuck to his position, he'd be voting with us. His former Home Secretary says the plan won't work. His current Home Secretary calls it batshit. His former Immigration Minister doesn't back his plan. Even the Prime Minister himself doesn't believe in it. And last week, another of his MPs said the Tories should admit that things have got worse since they came to office, that after 14 years they've left Britain less united, the country is a sadder place. If the Prime Minister can't even persuade his own MPs that it's worth supporting him, if he himself doesn't even believe in his own policies, why on earth should anyone else think differently?
Mr. Speaker, another week when it's crystal clear the honourable gentleman doesn't believe in anything and he doesn't have a plan. Now, while he talks the country down, let me update him on what's actually been happening in the past week. Inflation more than halved from 11% to 4%. Real wages rising for the 5th month in a row. Last week, rates started falling and millions of people benefited from a tax cut worth £450. So while he takes us back to square one with a £28 billion tax grab, let's stick with a plan that's delivering a brighter future for Britain.
Mr. Speaker, it's against the law to silence victims of crime, but that's exactly what the Post Office did through the use of non-disclosure agreements. And this is just the most recent case of NDAs covering up mismanagement, misconduct and even crimes at work. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, consider banning their use in all severance agreements once and for all?
Minister.
My right honourable friend is right to raise an important point, and the ability to speak out about things is key to unlocking justice. And while NDAs can have a place, my honourable friend is right to say that they shouldn't be used to stop victims of crime, in particular, getting the justice that they deserve. I can tell her that the Ministry of Justice are carefully considering how to best address this issue, including legislation, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary...
This is such an important question, the issue of NDAs and silencing people who are struggling to try and get justice, particularly, I think, those people who are being caught whistleblowing in organisations like the NHS, the effort which is made by the system, by the government, by the NHS, oh, indeed, by the post office, to silence people who have a perfectly sound and reasonable case. The effort which is made to stop these cases getting to court, the effort made incidentally, and here I think I may be a little controversial, the effort that is made by the legal system itself to stop cases and individuals getting heard, simply because what they are trying to say is inconvenient, but true. I can list so many cases that I have heard recently, particularly about the NHS, and people who have seen bad behaviour, who have called it out, and who have been silenced, whose lives have been turned upside down by the bullies in power. And those bullies in power, not only at the NHS, not only in the legal system, but also at the top of government today. Think back to the fact that Jeremy Hunt, the man who has made spoonerism popular, was at one time in charge of the NHS, was at one time the minister in charge of health, and he himself has single-handedly tried to stop whistleblowers being heard. I find it shocking. I find it scurrilous, and I am going to call it out. I am going to deal with it in time. I've already raised it a few times in the past, and I'm going to raise it in a very specific way in the future. So watch out for that. Let's get back to the Prime Minister's questions.
Mr. Speaker, when people woke up today in homes that they can't afford to heat, with mortgages that they're struggling to pay, to news that inflation is once again on the rise, they'll have looked to Westminster for answers. And instead they find a UK government which is tearing itself apart over how quickly it can send vulnerable people on a plane to Rwanda. Surely the Prime Minister must understand that the anger that some of his own backbenchers have towards him is no comparison to the anger that the public have towards his party.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable gentleman did care about supporting working families to pay their bills, to pay their mortgage, why on earth is the SNP making Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, where the average, Mr. Speaker, not the wealthiest, where the average worker in Scotland is now paying more tax than they do in England?
Stephen Flynn.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the Rwanda bill, the reality is that if you want to stop the smuggling gangs, you should introduce safe and legal routes. But instead, the Prime Minister is seeking to weaponise some of the most vulnerable people in society. It is straight out of the cruel and callous right-wing extremist playgroup. His time in office is fast approaching its conclusion. Does he seriously want this to be his legacy?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, it is important that we stop the boats because illegal migration is simply not fair, Mr. Speaker. It's not right that some people jump the queue, that they take away our resources to help those who are the most compassionate, that need our most help, and, by the way, Mr. Speaker, are exploited by gangs, and many of them lose their lives making these dangerous crossings. So I completely disagree with the honourable gentleman. The fair and the compassionate thing to do is to break these criminal gangs, and that's why we're going to stop the boats.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unexpectedly, 5 months ago, I had a heart attack. And thanks to the swift action of the NHS emergency services, it was caught early. So one stent operation later, I was on a swift path to rehabilitation and recovery and stand here today fighting fit and a bit lighter too. So along with encouraging everyone to visit the British Heart Foundation website to understand the early warning signs and get fantastic resources to help them, would the Prime Minister also join me in personally thanking everyone who helped to save my life and help me recover, including the East of England Ambulance Service, the teams at Watford General and Harefield Hospital, the cardiac rehabilitation teams, and everyone who supported me, especially my family and my team, some of whom are in the gallery today, to ensure that I continue to deliver for the great people of Watford.
I thank my honourable friend for sharing his story, and I know the whole House will be delighted to hear that he's made a swift recovery. We all wish him good health for the future as he resumes his excellent campaigning on behalf of his constituents in Watford. And I also join him in thanking our fantastic NHS staff for the life-saving work that they do up and down the country. We're backing them with record resources, from our doctors to our ambulance service. We are all in this House truly grateful for what they do.
Caroline
So-
Lucas.
Thank you.
Rishi Sunak is simply dodging the question, and he can dodge it once, but it is so interesting that Keir Starmer asks the question again and again and again, sacrifices all his questions simply to demonstrate that Rishi Sunak is not prepared to answer in a straightforward way. And Chris Heaton-Harris, who's sitting next to him, I think is looking increasingly uncomfortable, though he does enjoy the line about the combs. Sunak has listed the lawyers who like the Rwanda bill, but actually there's not that many who do. There's quite a lot of lawyers who don't like it, who think it won't work. There are many people who think it won't work. Is it right? Will it work? And do people really think it's important? People might think migration is important, but do they think that Rwanda is important? Do they even know where Rwanda is? Do they care? And in addition, James Arbuthnot, the fellow who was so involved in supporting the post office, says there's a xenophobic streak which is running through conservatism and it puts people off. Added to which, of course, you might have noticed that the Prime Minister completely ignores the fact that inflation has just gone up. And the main cause of that inflation going up? Higher taxation. Higher taxation, duty. Again, Brexit. And why will nobody admit that Brexit is the problem? Brexit lies at the heart of the immigration problem. Brexit lies at the heart of this inflation spike. Inflation is on the rise again, and yet the Prime Minister says that it's just claims that inflation has fallen from 11%. Well, you know, some of us have a very long memory, and the Prime Minister is playing around with words, and he should be dealing with reality. Playing around with words, playing around with himself, it doesn't matter. It's just not. It's not acceptable in a serious debate, which Prime Minister's questions is supposed to involve. It's supposed to involve a question and an answer, rather than a question and some sort of game of hide and seek. This is absurd. This is playtime, not serious politics. And it's high time this changed.